We're now going to take a look at the overridden onTouchEvent method. Now we've seen this method in a couple of earlier apps, and we used it to process touch events. So for example, if you think back to the Canon game app, we used the onTouchEvent method to aim the cannon at the user's finger based on a touch on the screen. Now in that app, we would only have one touch at a time, and therefore we didn't have to have the ability to distinguish between multiple different fingers. You may recall in the test drive of this application that I used multiple fingers to draw on the screen. And it turns out that Android is capable of maintaining unique IDs for each of what it calls pointers, your fingers, that are on the screen at a given time, and those unique IDs are maintained across motion events as the onTouchEvent method gets called multiple times. So let's see how it is that we deal with multiple touch events. So onTouchEvent, as you can see, receives a motion event as an argument, and it's going to be getting called repeatedly for all of the motion events that are occurring, all of the touch events that are occurring on the screen. Now the first thing we do here at line 116 is called getActionMasked on the event object. And what this does is it gives us back a constant from the motion event class that represents the particular type of event that occurred. So for example, if I go to the motion event class in the documentation here, whoops, let's try that again. We'll take a look at the constants that are available to us, and you can see that there's all sorts of different action event constants. So we're looking for very specific events in this example. Motion event.action down and motion event.action pointer down, if those are the events that occurred, will result in a call to our touch started method to indicate that a new finger touched the screen. Now the difference between these two constants is the difference between the first finger being placed onto the screen and subsequent fingers being placed onto the screen. So action down is the first finger, action pointer down is a subsequent finger. So for either of those cases, a finger has now touched the screen and therefore a touch has started. Now before we look at the arguments to touch started, let's take a look at this line 117. Event.getActionIndex gives us an index number that represents where in the motion event object the information is stored for a particular finger that's touching the screen. That is not the unique ID number of that finger, which is important for maintaining the path information across motion events. So this is just an index in the current motion event that indicates where we can find the information about the motion event that's being reported right now. So as you can see here at line 124, for the current motion event, touch started is going to get called if it's an action down or an action pointer down action. And we will go into the event object and get the x coordinate at that action index and the y coordinate at that action index. But we're also going to pass in a third piece of information, which is the result of this call to the event object's getPointerID method with action index as an argument. At that index in the event object is the actual unique pointer ID of the finger that caused the current onTouch event that we're processing. And that information is critical to enable us to maintain the points and paths correctly on a finger-by-finger basis in the app. Now the reason that you have the difference between the action index and the pointer ID is because let's consider the case where you touch the screen with two fingers to start. So I have two fingers on the screen, one of which is the first finger down and one of which is the second finger down. And I start dragging both of those fingers. Now at some point the user might lift up the first finger down, at which point that path is done being drawn and the second finger down becomes the first finger down because it's the only one that's still down on the screen. So because of situations like that, there is a difference between where you find the information inside the mouse event for a given onTouchEvent call versus the specific pointer that the event is associated with. And for that reason, we need to get the pointer ID, which we will use in touch started, and as you'll see in a moment, in touch ended as well, so that we can properly access the information for the paths being drawn in our hash maps that we created earlier in this class. Now, if the action that occurred is an action up or an action pointer up, which means the first finger was removed from the screen or a subsequent finger was removed from the screen, in that case we're going to indicate that the touch ended for a specific pointer. We have to know which pointer it was, and that's going to complete the path for that particular pointer ID, at which point we can make that path part of the permanent bitmap in memory, and we can now worry about just the paths that are still being drawn or the ones that will be drawn in the future. So those are the cases for an initial touch of any finger and a finishing touch of any finger. And then for all other cases, it's the user dragging a finger across the screen, in which case we call touch moved, and we pass in the event object as an argument. Now, once we've either processed the touch started, touch ended, or touch moved method calls, we then call invalidate, which redraws everything onto the custom view, the doodle view. And then finally, we return true to indicate that the event has been handled.